I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messages God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today my guest is astrologer Merrylin LeBlanc. You probably know her not only because she's been on this show before, but Merrylin hosts the show Moonwise, which is on every Saturday on KSFR at 2 p.m. KSFR Public Radio is 101.1 FM. And she also does, every day, every morning, Moon Minute?
Moon Minute.
Yes. Hi there.
Hi.
Welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
Oh, we're going to have fun today.
Yes.
As we do every week, today's prophetic topic is a part of thy awareness. And this topic comes from Edgar Casey's reading number 69-4, line 17, which was given on February 8th, 1941. And it reads as follows. Belittle not those things that hinder. These are a part of thy cross, of that necessary, else he, according to his promise, would not allow these to be a part of thy awareness. So you're probably asking yourself, what did he just say? The key is thy cross. We're going to talk about a astrological phenomenon that's happening on August 6th, which is called the Grand Cross, and that's what it means, what it doesn't mean, how it impacts us and doesn't impact us, and all that kind of good stuff. And that's what we're here for today. But before we even do that, why don't you, for the small minority of people who might be tuning in, like out-of-towners who have never heard you on radio, have not seen you on this show before, tell them a little bit about how you became an astrologer, what is astrology, and that kind of good stuff.
Wow, a little bit about how I became an astrology. Well, I was going to astrologers, and one of the astrologers that I went to looked at my chart and said, oh, you'd be a natural at this, and I teach classes. Are you interested? So I started taking some classes, and oh gosh, the rest is history.
Did it resonate with you right away?
Oh, very much so. And at the same time, I'd been using other metaphysical tools like the I Ching and tarot cards, and I'd gone to psychics and channelers, people who deal with other phenomena coming through other ways. But astrology felt natural to me, and astrology is so vast. It's a complete system in terms of looking at a map of the world as we know it, and the universe as we know it. And you could, if you have enough data, you could use astrology for practically everything that we know in our known world. And that was just phenomenal to me, and so I loved it from that. It's elegance. It's very simple and yet extremely complex at the same time. And it basically is a map of something. It's a guide. It literally means the story of the stars, but
you call it a system. Would you call it a science?
Well, it's more than a science. There is a scientific part of it, and the part of it that's scientific pretty much is astronomy. And it's not that you have to know astronomy inside and out to be an astrologer, but there is that part of it, which is more the naming of the stars and measuring movements and phases and things of that sort. But for the astrologer, there's the story part when you look at the word literally, astrology, the story of. So there's this giving of a story and the interpretation of the story. And sometimes, just as anybody who tells stories and interprets stories, like movie directors, the interpretation varies from person to person, because you're dealing with the story that comes out of symbols that represent things from beyond the common dimension, the three-dimensional world that we live in, that represent like the what some call the fourth dimension of archetypes and metaphors and things of that sort. And they have many interpretations. There's not always just one simple interpretation.
So the symbols are really multifaceted. Because,
yes.
I mean, there was the same thing with, you talk about tarot cards. I mean, I believe it's the same thing. You have the cards, but when I was doing tarot readings, one of the things I came to believe is that the cards were just a medium that we use as a point of focus, but it was actually the exchange of spiritual energy touching one another that gave us the real story.
Right.
But astrology is much more in depth than that.
Well,
there's so many more factors than
right,
there are in
exactly,
the cards.
Exactly, and that's one of the things that I love about it. You can fill in a lot of blanks with astrology, and that's where the complexity lies.
What are the origins of astrology?
Who knows?
Okay,
I mean,
they go back that far.
Right, as far as what we know of history of mankind, you can find indications of astrology. There are artifacts that come from way back when. I mean, this is not my expertise. There are astrologers who really do specialize in the history of astrology, but it's been with us throughout, I believe, throughout all of man's existence on this planet.
So just somewhere along the way back when somebody looked up in the sky and saw some stars and started to see if there was a correlation and came up with something.
Something of that sort. I mean, it's interesting because there are different things that have evolved throughout time. Like another astrologer was telling me recently in his research, where there's a component that most Western and Vedic Eastern astrologers use called the house system that describes different areas of your life, like your personality, your possessions, your communication, your family, and we call those houses. Well, in probably 3,000-4,000 years ago, those didn't exist in the systems that were being used. And how they were working with those things, it was different, and I guess different, to use another comparison, would be to look at healing practices. I mean, look at, how we deal with healing ailments like a cold or a tumor, which were a phenomena that showed up and before the Common Era, and how they were dealt with then are different than how they're dealt with now, and I think that's the same thing in astrology.
As we grow, we evolve, and our understandings deepen, and how we use them. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That was I don't want to get sidetracked, but that was one of the conversations I had a couple of weeks ago with Chris Grissom, the evolution, that God evolves.
Oh, yes. I mean, I believe in, this, I think it was Jung who also had this in one of his writings, that God as creator, or whatever that force is as creation, the act of creating, that we are creative beings who continue the creative process of the divine.
Yeah, exactly. And that is so cool. If we didn't do that, where we'd be stuck and how we saw the divine and our relationship with it, we would, I don't know. I don't want to go there.
Yeah,
it's too scary.
Another topic.
So let's start on the cross. So my understanding is this is happening August 6th at this year, 2010, and I have it down at 10:47:28 Eastern Standard Time. So that would be 8:40 p.m., by the way.
Right.
And that it's an alignment of Pluto, Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. And then the qualifiers when the sun and moon move through Cancer. Can you explain all that?
Wow. That's like a huge thing to jump into. Let's
Okay.
let's talk first about the cross.
Go
these
for it.
These planets are lined in such a way that if you were to draw lines between from
Like
one
center
to the
to center.
other, or center to center, or whatever, you could form a cross, or you could form a square. Like.
Because you've got the two.
Yeah, if you
Yeah,
connect,
so
if you just connect you can either connect the dots diagonally,
Or
you can connect them from one side to the other side to the other side. It's sort of like a cross within a square.
okay.
If we were to draw this out, and in astrology, we refer to it either as a grand cross or a grand square. So both of them work, and looking at the symbolism of a cross is very interesting in terms of interpreting what that means.
Let me interrupt just
yeah.
a second.
Sure.
The concept of a square to me would be the exact opposite of the concept of a cross.
Perhaps not. But
Doesn't a square kind of box you in?
well, it does, and actually, the square is one of the most universal symbols of stability and of manifestation. It in numerology. It belongs to the harmonics of 4, which have to do with manifesting anything here on the physical plane. And when you think about the way squares are used, like it's the most basic shape for most houses, most house dwellings. Not that everybody's house is a perfect square. I mean, sometimes they're rectangles or whatever, but having a building with 4 right angles is a very stable building. And we also have like the concept of the village square, the plaza, which, often isn't literally a square of 4 equal sides and, 4 right angles, but close. And it's so stabilizing in terms of bringing people together and somewhat keeping them together. So there's some real positive aspects about it. But in order to have a square that's really functional, you have to have the right tension between all the corners. And this is where the cross comes in. It's sort of like if you imagine cross beams in a house, or even having 2 walls at right angles. They have to be in a certain kind of tension in order to be maintained. And if it's the cross tension, when we look at the symbolism of the cross, that there's the cross in the Native American medicine wheel, which represents the 4 directions. And it's all the directions that keep us sort of focused on, say, the earth. The cross is actually, in astrology and in other traditions as well, the cross within a circle is actually a symbol for earth in astrology. And so if you look at it, as something that has come into the material realm, into the physical realm, it has solidity of some sort, and it takes every single corner of the earth. If we were to think of the earth as having an east, a west, a south, a north, each corner has to be there for the whole earth to be. Imagine if somebody, this is horrible, if somebody, what's going on in my mind right now, but if somebody took an atomic bomb, or several of them or whatever, and blasted off what we know as the Arctic Circle, how stable would we be as a sphere? I don't think very stable at all. So there's a question of tension here. Now when the cross comes...
Is that tension the material meeting the spirit?
You could look at it that way. I mean, that's where we get into the mythology of the cross in Christianity, in terms of Jesus, being crucified and dying on the cross, which I think is purely symbolic for his mission, not necessarily for suffering's sake. And again, it's a question of the every single angle of the cross being addressed. And I think it's interesting that, if you look at a crucifix, with Jesus's body on it. You see his feet often nailed down, so that they're not dangling anywhere, and you see the hands nailed. And we have the head drooping, but there's that crown of thorns, and I'm thinking, it's sort of taking the place of somebody having taken maybe a band like you have on your forehead and nailing that behind. It's sort of like bringing to mind that it takes every corner to have the mission be complete. And
I'm going to add one other thing into this,
yes,
which is, from my perspective, the center of the cross is about where the heart is.
right,
And that, again, is where the spirit and the material come and meet. And that's
Right.
where we make that decision.
right. And when the heart is encompassing all of it,
Yeah.
the heart is not turning away from any part of it.
It embraces it all and puts
Right.
it into balance.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So when we have a grand cross in astrology, we're looking at four corners in great tension to each other and being brought into balance. So in this instance of this event that you mentioned on August 6th, which I need to say from the beginning, it's just a short amount of time. It's not going to go on for more than a few hours as far as that formation in astrological terms. But what is significant to me about it is that it triggers the last lunar eclipse we had. This past Sunday, Sunday evening, we had a full moon. A month ago, we had a full moon that was also a lunar eclipse. And where the sun and the moon were at that lunar eclipse in the signs of Cancer and Capricorn, the sun was in Cancer. The sun has moved into Leo, by the way. So whoever gave you that information about the sun being in Cancer, it's not going to be in Cancer.
It said it
on
moved
August
through
6th.
it, but okay.
It had already moved through.
Yeah.
And maybe that person was referring to the lunar eclipse that we had a month ago. And they were, the sun and the moon were at these early degrees of Cancer and Capricorn that are pretty much exactly 90 degrees roughly. I mean, there's a give a degree here or there, give and take on either side, to where the planets are that are on the other beam of the cross. If we have the sun and the moon on one beam opposite each other, as we did a month ago, and then have Jupiter and Uranus on this on the other another beam at one end, and Saturn and Mars on that same beam but at the other end, and Venus coming close in to join them. So that's what you can pull Venus in there, I guess. You have this cross formation, this tension that we had. Then what's going to happen on the 6th is that Pluto, where the moon was at the last lunar eclipse a month ago, Pluto is also there, and Pluto doesn't move very fast. Pluto's still there.
Okay.
So as the moon moves into Cancer on August 6th, it's going to be opposite Pluto. So it's going to be Pluto and the moon. The sun is going to be in the next sign of Leo, so it's where it is now already. And so it's not so much engaged in this. But so what's going to happen is it's going to trigger one of the issues that came up with this lunar eclipse that preceded the solar eclipse we had a couple weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, 2, 3, depending on when you're watching this.
Yes.
And your show starts. But so just overall, to put all of those tensions into a context of the mission, if we go to the Christian message of the cross, was I believe, other people can have their interpretations, that Christian mission, the mission of the Christ, was to bring us to a point of universal, compassionate love for one another. Sort of an unconditional love that no matter how horrendous behavior gets, there's still an unconditional part that accepts that person for his or her humanity.
Like that final statement, forgive them, they know not what they do.
Right.
Yeah.
That being the core of the mission. Now, in the context of the charts for these eclipses that we've had, the universal message has been for people to come to their own truth. There's a lot of symbolism around here where it's sort of like each of us is here on this planet today in the midst of tremendous stress and tremendous upheaval. We have the economy, not just in this country, kind of wobbling, out of balance, completely out of balance in some cases, and one group will say this about the economy. We hear the government saying another thing about it, the economy, and this is just by one example. There are other examples. We could take the whole war issue too as another example, and so the question is: are we going to continue to go along with what the mass media tells us about what the problems are and how they need to be solved? Or are we going to come and go inside each of our own beings and say, as an adult, this is what I know about things. This is the bottom line of how I see any economy work. And this is what I'm going to believe, and I'm going to scale that up to other places. And what so-and-so is saying doesn't smack as truth to me. So the whole issue is, are you going to stand in your own truth and not be susceptible to what others are persuading you to believe? Maybe they're persuading you to believe things that are really good and positive to believe, but maybe not. And one of the things that we've seen in the last decade especially is how easily human beings can be swayed, how easily they can go along with an issue. For example, with the whole war on terror. I'm going to say this I've not said this on here myself. I almost feel like what we've done in Iraq and in Afghanistan is like we're fighting street gangs. I used to be a teacher and then a school principal in an inner city school in California.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that we were well versed on is how to deal with gangs. And the number one principle was you don't recognize them. Period. You do not recognize them. They do something, you wipe it out, you don't say any. Well, might say something privately to individuals like, you go home, you come back without that on. End of story. It is not made a big public to-do in front of the whole school. It's between you and that individual or individuals. End of story. They put graffiti on the wall, you have the custodian paint over it. Don't say anything, except maybe if you know who did it, you pull those individuals in privately and deal with them. But what we're doing, we have this big fear build-up thing, and bringing to the public this whole image again of, they're trying to kill us, and we keep perpetuating it.
Well, let's try to break this down in the symbol of the cross again.
Yes, go back to the cross.
Yeah, no, because I believe it's, everything we've touched on brings us to the point you're talking about. We have a cross, which in its most simplest terms, we've come to a crossroads. We got to make a decision. Mm-hmm. So we're in a transition. And the cross, if we meet it at the center, says we approach this from the heart, which is the unifier. If we are not, then we're going to be stuck in that fear because we're stuck in the material. And the material is about fear, where the spirit is about the heart. So does that sum it up?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, it does, because you won't go into fear. But I guess if I went back to what I was talking about in terms of the configuration, which was a grand cross also at the last lunar eclipse, which was just a little over a month ago in June.
So these are fairly common occurrences, grand crosses?
No, they're not. They're not. But when bodies that move very quickly, like our moon does, I mean, our moon circles the whole zodiac within a month period.
28 days.
Yeah.
Roughly, yeah.
So it's possible that if other bodies, planets mostly that we look at, are already in what we call a T-square, that is, it's sort of like one of the corners of a square. And there's some planets at one end of one of the walls, there's some planets at the corner, and there's some planets at the other end. They form a T-square. If we take the two that are at the ends and draw a line between them, and then in the middle of that line go down to the one in the corner, you've got a T.
Okay.
And if we have that configuration going on, which we have had for a couple months now, majorly happening. It started out with Saturn opposite Uranus since November of 2008. And then more recently, within the last 2 years, Pluto has moved into that halfway position between the two of them down in the corner. And so this T-square has been with us now for quite a few months.
Well, let me back this up for a second. I'm not sure how much the audience is watching understands us, and let me ask you. Let me see if I can guide this just a little bit.
Okay.
Can you? What we're talking about is a circle, basically. That's the zodiac,
Right.
and the planets move each at a different rate to circumnavigate that zodiac. So we talked about the moon taking 28 days, it zips through. Can you kind of just throw some other times out for like the various planets?
I didn't bring an ephemeris. I'd have to have my glasses on and wrap things out. I can't. I didn't.
I mean, like
that.
roughly Pluto, what, every 50 years, 100 years?
Oh, Pluto takes 250 years to circle the zodiac, and right now it's in the sign of Capricorn. At the beginning of the sign, it was at the end of the sign of Capricorn when this nation was born with the Declaration of Independence in 1776.
So basically, it's like if we're at the center of the circle, things move faster at the center than they do on the perimeter because they're covering greater distances on the perimeter.
Exactly.
So if Pluto is 250 years, and the other guy could be 200. So they're moving very slow, and they could stay very close to position for an extended period of time.
Right.
And I just wanted to clarify that.
Right. And Uranus, was one of the other planets I was talking about in this configuration, takes 84 years to go around the zodiac, and Saturn opposite takes approximately 29 years, sort of like the moon cycle, except in years, not months or days. So this configuration is
slow in building and slow in moving.
And so as the moon moves around, it can trigger this configuration repeatedly. But when we only have what could be called a triangle, the triangle, if you deal with solids, the triangle wants to go into the square, and you could go to Platonic solids, which let's not go there.
Okay.
but it does have to do with the dynamic as we see it in astrology, is that with this configuration of Saturn, Uranus, Pluto, and Saturn and Uranus have been joined by Mars, Venus, and Jupiter. That configuration is putting a lot of stress on where Pluto is. And Pluto in Capricorn, Pluto is about transformation. It's about purification and renewal. And Capricorn on a mundane level is very much about the structures that we live in. The structure of our government, the structure of our families, the structures of our businesses, the structure of our economy. And so Pluto there is really stressing us to transform some of those structures. And even on a personal level, we all have Capricorn somewhere in our charts. You know, it could be, Capricorn could be in the area that has to do with your physical body, and somebody's going through all kinds of calamities that are forcing the person to renew their physical health, maybe in their 6th house or even some other placements.
So the pressure that you're talking about is, I'll use a term universal. It's the micro, which is the individual themselves, how they see themselves, how they deal with their health, how they see their relationship to society. And it goes to the macro, which is how society deals with society or other societies, and everything in between.
Well, you know, there's, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are multiple interpretations of the symbolism.
Okay.
You could go to every single astrologer in town, and in Santa Fe we have a lot. We often joke among ourselves that there's probably more of us per capita than in any other city in the world. And it's highly likely that there are certain things that you would hear about Pluto and where it is in your chart that would be repeated from one astrologer to another, but not necessarily in the same words. And there would be other things that you would hear that some of which you may not hear from any of the other astrologers. And the likelihood is that most, if not all of what you hear, because I'm not saying that everybody is, you know, some astrologers work more out of the intuitive realm, and information is coming through like a psychic filter, and that has something else to do there. But I'd say most, if not all of what you would hear would be true, but put differently. And some of it not repeated by other astrologers. And that's how vast the field is, because we're interpreting symbols, we're interpreting metaphors, we're interpreting archetypes, and these things have many meanings. Like, for example, one of the archetypes for Pluto is that of the sorcerer or the healer. I mean, there's even more than one archetype that works for them. And so we could, if we looked at Pluto as the healer, you know, what Pluto is doing is saying, you know, you've got a cancer there in this structure, and we've got to take it out. So Pluto becomes the surgeon and starts, you know, cutting and getting rid of stuff. It's pretty intense. And yet, if somebody else says, oh, but Pluto is the sorcerer, and the sorcerer is working his magic, and, you know, the way that things are being achieved is not as effective. You know, the way the economy is going and the way people are dealing with the taking care of their own business and their household and stuff. We have to do these things differently, and so we're gonna work a little magic. Some of it might not be perceived as white magic; it might be black magic. But whatever, we're going to work some magic so that what's not working is going to have to be obviously discarded. But you know, there's many ways to go about the interpretation.
Let me ask you another question. I mean, so this whole process, it's slow in coming and it's slow in passing.
As far as the configuration, the cross.
Yes.
The T-square cross, a cross with no top to it, is slow. The grand cross that you're looking at on August 4th is going to pass
quickly.
The next day, it's gone.
But we build to it and we come down off of it, if I hear you correctly.
Right.
Does the effects of it last beyond its passing, so to speak?
It can, in this situation, basically going back to what I was saying about it triggering a lunar eclipse. We generally, not always, there are anomalies now and then with eclipses, but most often we have 2 eclipses a year, solar eclipses. Those are new moons. And usually they're preceded or followed by full moons that are lunar eclipses, okay? This phenomenon seems to correlate with crises, issues that really have come to a head and must be dealt with, either by individuals or by nations or by some organization or group. They usually indicate that, and I usually describe that phenomenon as information that is coming through from the subconscious realm or unconscious realm whose time is up. It needs to be attended to. And the cross that we have on August 6th is triggering a lunar eclipse that we had this summer back in June. And when a configuration or certain planets, for example Mars, which is also involved in this, when they trigger an energy that is intense and has an effect that often goes on for 6 months, the eclipses sometimes, depending on the nature of the eclipse itself, and also depending on who we're talking about, whose chart, like if it's overlapped in the United States chart or your chart or somebody else's, the effect can last for like 6 months or so. So August 6th, the event of August 6th, is triggering that lunar eclipse. And so it may bring back up again issues of how individuals try to hold their own ground in the midst of a mass consciousness that is trying to superimpose a way of living that is not consistent or compatible with what certain individuals believe is a way of living. So it's sort of like the individual versus the corporations.
Yeah. We have 6 planets that are in this cross. Theoretically, I guess, if I understand.
And then the moon.
And the moon.
Okay.
And we have 4 basic houses that are touched by this cross. Is the effect limited to the planets and what they impact? Is the effect limited to the houses and what they impact? Or is it just going to be across the board? I mean, is there enough energy that it floods the whole circle, so to speak, or does it stay contained within its own segments?
It actually can flood the whole circle.
Okay.
And that involves other techniques in astrology, and it would vary from person to person. For some individuals, this grand cross and the crosses that I referred to with the eclipses, it may not be as palpable, and it may be that this is the way their charts are configured, their natal charts, because everything goes back to a root sense of beginning, which means we have to look at each individual person or entity to know what the effects will be. And for some people, they may not be very palpable, although I think indeed palpable. What makes some of the tensions that we've seen with the economy palpable to everybody is that the planets involved in the 3 ends of the beams, the T-square, they happen to be at the beginning of what we call cardinal signs. This is Aries, Libra, and Capricorn. Cancer being the other. There's 4 cardinal signs. And Cancer would be the 4th one, where the moon will be on the 6th. Cardinal energy is energy that is initiating and emerging. It works off of that principle. And it often brings something into the physical realm as versus dealing with the emotional realm or with the realm of people's thoughts and ideas. And so when cardinal energy is heavily involved in these kinds of tensions, we see the physical effects of that tension. And so we've seen some of it in what's been happening in the economy. I mean, there are people and there are astrologers that are saying, you know, like the banks are going to collapse or whatever. And I mean, I have this thing about, oh, well, so what? What if the banks collapse? What if they all shut down? What if the ring of fire, which is being highly activated by the tension in these cardinal signs right now? I mean, just last weekend there was big earthquakes off the coast of the Philippines, 7-pointers, etc. I mean, we see a lot of activation in the ring of fire. What if that ring of fire gets active in the North American continent? It started to down in Mexico a few months ago, in the Mexican-California border. What if more happens to the point that there's huge devastation up and down the western coast? Okay, I don't mean to belittle what that does to people's lives by saying this. But in terms of the majority of the world, who most of us aren't living like, say, in the South Pacific where they've experienced tremendous upheaval over the last few years. But, you know, we're still here. I mean, and I don't mean just here in Santa Fe. Fine. I mean, even if you're living in California, you're still, you know, if you didn't get hit by something falling or whatever, you're still there. And basically the message is, and here's the symbolism of the physical, the message is you've got to change a lot on the inside to deal with the outside.
Again, we're coming back to the basic cross.
Yes, exactly.
You know, that in order to, I mean, again, Christianity, it's about you have to have death before you have rebirth.
Right. Right.
And to think that we are not going to have that sequence is maybe self-delusional.
It can be. Or to think that you could hold on to something like, you know, last weekend, I think in Europe, they did some kind of stress test in several banks, not a lot, I mean, percentage-wise, failed the test. And I think I read something about in one area where they were fearing a run on a bank or something like that. But the thing is that, you know, if we were to have such a collapse again in this country like we did in the 30s, at which time 3 of the planets we're talking about were in the same kind of stressful configuration, just in different places in it and in different signs in that configuration. You know, so what if you got your money out of the bank and everybody else didn't, and the world is completely changed? You've got to deal with the changes that are being asked of us.
Yeah, having the money, if it has no value.
Holding on to what was is not going to move much of anything. You know, it's things. Everything's changed around you.
But we, as a species, tend to resist change. That's that fear we were talking about earlier in the show. That's the material. It's mine, as opposed to I don't own anything.
And yet the only constant is change. I mean, look at our bodies. They don't stay the same. We don't look like we looked 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
But the obvious, in so many ways, is ignored.
That's true.
You know, I mean, you know,
and you know, part of that holding on is part of the illusions that I was talking about that these eclipses have been about, in terms of the Madison Avenue Hollywood images that have been thrown at us as terms of what kind of ideal do we want to live by. And one of the 3 of them really, Saturn is in the sign of Libra, and Mars is in the sign of Libra. Venus is entering Libra soon. This is a sign that has to do with ideals, ideal relationship, whether it's the relationship between me and you, or it's the relationship I have with these things around me, the relationship I have with my work, it's about ideal relationships and how they're structured. And yet, you know, we have been in a culture that has standardized via Madison Avenue advertising and Hollywood a certain kind of ideal and made that, you know, the dream for everybody. And that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say that these eclipses are saying, wait a minute, you need to identify your own ideal.
So that starts with self.
Yes.
I can't see the world differently if I don't see myself differently.
Right.
So the first transformation has to happen within. So again, we come back to the center of the cross is the heart.
Right. You know, so for people who've been paying attention to their patterns, which is basically what I try to do with my work, is to draw people's attention to patterns in their lives. For those people out there, I find that these times who are really paying attention to what's going on with them. I think these times are just ripe with all kinds of imagery that comes into one's consciousness of showing you what those patterns are. I have gotten to the point where I think I need to take a vacation to deal with some of my stuff. And I'm talking about internal stuff. I'm not, you know, it's nothing to do with the outside world in some ways.
Which in a lot of spiritual practices is the only real thing. I figure, was it Sai Baba who said, anything between meditations is an illusion? Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, so we got to take care of our stuff first. If we change ourselves and how we see ourselves, then we could change how we see the world and how we act or don't act with it. You were talking about cardinal signs, and I want to go back. So are people going to be, who are in the cardinal signs, are they going to be more impacted than people who are not?
More than likely, yes. This again is Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. But we all have those signs in our charts.
So it will impact us more radically as opposed to where it is in our chart?
Where it is and where other planets are in relationship to those points in your chart.
So there could be aspects in the chart that counteract the effects of the cross, or does the cross override everything?
It doesn't override everything. There could be things that counteract. But the thing is that like Uranus and Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are, well, and Mars right now, but by the time we have this August 6th thing, Mars will have moved away from this point, are very close to the beginning point of each of those cardinal signs, which we call a 0 point. And sometimes it'll be referred to as the Aries point, because in the harmonics of 4, which are, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, are harmonics that have to do with manifesting on the physical plane. You can collapse everything into Aries and all those other signs, 3 other signs, and we can say that the 0 point, if people who have the 0 point activated in their natal charts have a real presence, and I'm not saying that they're the CEO of a company or something, but their physical presence and their physicality and how the physical world operates around them and how they operate with them is very much pronounced. I could have, if I'd done some little research, I could probably come up with a few names, but I didn't even think of
that's okay.
doing that.
So people who are you saying people who are born in the front end of those signs are going to be more drastically impacted than people who are born later in those signs?
Yes.
And then those born later in the signs are more drastically impacted than those who are not born in those signs?
Right, right. But there's also another thing, like, when we're dealing with harmonics, these are the harmonics of 4. If we deal with the harmonics of 8, which deal with cross quarter points in the seasons, like halfway through a season, if we were to put it in those terms, those points are also strong, and those are in the middle of what we call fixed signs, like the very middle of Taurus, the middle of Leo, the middle of Scorpio, the middle of Aquarius. People who have points there are going to get impacted very strongly as well with these points. So it's not simple. It's not.
No,
I mean, you can't. It's like one size doesn't fit all. But that's why I guess you have to go back to this is affecting the whole globe, the whole planet, and that's why I brought up the economy several times, because the economy, I don't think there's anywhere where the economy is healthy and thriving on the planet. There's a lot of issues afloat right now, and probably it won't be until maybe the 2020s in which we'll see what the real result of all of this is. We're in the throes of...
Because of the lingering and the slow movement of the planets.
Well, no, they don't cause this. This is all symbology. They're symbolic. How do I say this? Sometimes, in trying to understand this myself, I think about archetypes, and I think about dimensions. We're living on the physical dimension right now, which has 3 dimensions in it, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, but we operate with a 4th, and some people even go to a 5th. Like, some people refer to the 5th dimension as this dimension of universal love, samadhi, where you go in the meditation zoned out zone.
Yeah, a spiritual realm.
Beautiful, wonderful.
Yeah.
There's other dimensions beyond that.
Yeah.
Well, somewhere in there, in the 4th, I believe, or whatever, when we're pulling through these energies that are bigger than any one of us or any consolidated group of us. The archetype of mother, which is the moon, is a huge archetype. It's about creating and giving birth, and there's this whole thing of like primogeniture with that archetype. The mother that creates without any insemination from any other being, and it's that actually gives rise to the notion that if you think of a personal God, that personal God is feminine, as mother, as versus father, which is more an archetype that has really been used more by patriarchal society that's been prevalent in the last 2,000 years, 3,000 maybe, sort of.
Yeah.
But these planets and the moon are representing these archetypes, and the archetypes have play on the earth. They come into incarnate form on the earth in various guises, and it's the astrology is just representing. It's a map that's just representing the interplay of these archetypes. That's all. That's how I see it. That's all they're doing. They're not causing anything. If anything is causal, it has to do with energy fields that are in other dimensions that are coming through into the physical dimension.
Well, I think they all come together, but
Yeah.
we're going to come down on time, so I just want a couple quick announcements. I'm going to come back to you for some advice to people when they start to freak out. What should they do? Anyway, just wanted to let you know that this is public access television. That means you out there, the watching audience, are part of the public. So, contact us, if you have more questions about, astrologically what's happening. That's why Merrylin's information is being put on the screen. My information also has been flashed on the screen. I do what I call spiritual counseling, and how to utilize spirit to get you through things that are seem insurmountable is what I do. And if you think I could be of any help to you, contact me. Also, again, this is public, so I want to hear from you. Let me know what you think of the shows. Let me know if there's topics you'd like for me to explore. We'd be happy to research them, get people here and talk about them. Also, I am looking for somebody who has a knowledge of Edgar Casey and his readings. I'd love to do a show on Casey, and don't want to do a solo show. I want somebody to join me. So if you fit that bill, contact me and we can talk about doing a show together. So let's get back to, now we've given them all this information, and people are, like, okay, the 6 comes along, and then as they're getting there, they start to see things shifting and things changing. And how do you counsel them to what they should be doing?
Well, I think energy precedes and follows, so it's not like it's the most exact thing unless you want to ritualize something. But basically, I think it's really important to be in one's center, to be in one's heart, which means follow your heart, do what your heart suggests that you do.
Coming back to the center of the cross.
Coming back to the center of the cross, right, exactly. And I know this is one thing that I know we talked about on my show, and that has to do with trying things differently, knowing that we're in the midst of tremendous change, tremendous change. And if some things seem to be bogging you down, then try something new, something that makes you really feel a love in your heart, whether it's a love for yourself or for somebody else or for the animals or for the flowers or for Santa Fe, whatever it is. Try doing something new, but staying centered, which is probably the easiest way to stay centered, is to have quiet time, to meditate,
some form
however
of
that is. And
practice.
the simplest is to go off by oneself and sit and breathe and tune into your heart, your physical heart, feel it beat.
Mm-hmm.
And send it love, send it gratitude, not just words. There are lots of words that you could say, I'm thankful to be alive, I'm thankful for this beautiful place called Santa Fe that I live in, etc. But conjure up that feeling of gratitude that you may have had towards somebody else or for something else, and send that to your heart and feel it in your body. This is what I'd recommend.
Couldn't come up with any better advice, but I just want to add one.
Well, that's universal. I mean, everybody's going to have
their own. They need to hear that, though.
Everybody's going to have their own personal need to do certain things based on their own charts.
We're going to put a quick wrap on this. I only want to add one thing to it. When things change, we don't always do them what we perceive to be perfectly the first time. That doesn't mean we shouldn't continue that path. So I want to thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
And the next time we have some other phenomena, we'll discuss that.
I always forget how fun this is. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you all for tuning in. Know that you are spirit. Look to that heart. Look to that place where the two oppositions meet. That's where you will find the answer. That's where you'll find yourself. So until next week, you are one with spirit. Demonstrate it. Be in love and light. Thank you.
I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.